think we're gonna talk about the Jeffrey Dahmer case with the gay clubs and the blackmail, human trafficking, pedophilia. You posted many articles about the subject. You created a whole thread on the forum. So please tell me about your inquiries.
Yeah, I just decided to look into some of the clubs and businesses that Jeffrey Dahmer frequented during his murder spree. And what I found was that many of these businesses were member-only establishments. We're given the impression of the case that these places were public, like they were public establishments, as in anybody could walk into these places and frequent it, and that's simply not the case.
Yeah.
And I found that to be quite disturbing in the sense that we always get the impression that that the gay community in Milwaukee was victimized by Jeffrey Dahmer, and these businesses were
Front.
sort of.
They were front actually.
They were front. No, they definitely were fronts. They were fronts for human trafficking, fronts for drug trafficking, fronts for blackmail. There was so much. There was behavior that you wouldn't associate with just run of the mill bars and clubs.
Yeah.
The police were constantly at these businesses and were shaking down the customers. There was stories of cops, undercover cops, being at these places, and you would think these people, would have, they wouldn't be associated with this type of activity, but it seems like the owners of these places were involved in something a little bit bigger than what was just running businesses in the gay community. They seemed very well connected. You had, the owners of these places were connected to different gay charities, different foundations, connected to communities, like the gay community, and you couldn't, it's almost like these businesses were very political in the sense of they were very involved in collecting, to me, information about the community, about their customers, about their
habits
and what their tastes were,
Yeah,
whether it be drugs or sex or.
Let's name a few of those clubs. You have like C'est La Vie, you had the 219 Club, you had the Phoenix Club, you had La Cage. And La Cage had preferred member cards.
Yes, C'est La Vie was an interesting place because C'est La Vie.
It was also like public knowledge that it was actually like a safe haven for runaways who were pimped out.
Yes, C'est La Vie was owned by a man named Clarence Germershausen. In the gay community, he was known as John Clayton. And before he owned C'est La Vie, he worked in a factory. I could not find anything about his life before he owned C'est La Vie. And he bought C'est La Vie and he turned it into a bar. And one of the things that he did was he had apartments above the business.
Mm-hmm.
and those apartments were rented by the young men who would work inside the bar. When they weren't working inside of the bar, they were prostituting themselves out to older men. And most of these young men that were in the bar or working in the bar
They were always under 18, right?
They were either barely legal, like around, like just turned 18, and younger.
Yeah.
And he was also known. John Clayton was also known for having sex with these young men, almost as it is they had to go through some sort of ritual to get into the business to work there. It was like they were being blackmailed from the beginning. And I found that strange, to say the least. And one of the big things at C'est La Vie was they had drag shows, and they had male strippers. Yep. That was their big thing in the bar. And John Clayton was also connected to the Cream City Foundation, a gay charity. And when he passed away, he left the charity $400,000, which was the largest donation the Cream City Foundation ever received. And he also was connected to a local gay newspaper called In Step. And he provided space for both the Cream City Foundation and In Step at one time, but those buildings were kept in poor shape, and both institutions were moved out of that building.
Let's talk.
And what I found also, another thing about John Clayton, he owned a bachelor pad, which was styled in almost like a Hugh Hefner type of home. And he had, according to to my research, he had 25 beds in his house, which led me to believe that he was also conducting prostitution inside of his own home.
Yeah.
His partner, Martin Belkin, also owned a rundown candy factory that he was going to sell after C'est La Vie closed down. And I suspect that may have been another place where they were conducting possibly prostitution.
Yeah, let's go to the L&L Tavern. That was a hangout of John Wayne Gacy. He was going there once in his Poker the Clown costume. And it was actually ook decades later the hunting ground of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yes, it was. What I found out about that place was that it was owned by or ran by a woman. It was owned by a woman, or ran by a woman, by the way, rather. And she came from the same place that one of Dahmer's victims came from. I believe it was Stephen Twomey. It was. I don't recall the city like right now, but they were both from the same. They were both from the same place, and I found that very interesting.
Yeah, Stephen Toomey was, I think, the guy who was killed in the Ambassador Hotel, and he was being transported in a big suitcase.
That the woman that ran it, Joan Gillen, and Stephen Tomey came from was Ontonagon, Michigan.
Yeah, but I was always suspected with the story that Dahmer gave that he was killing or had killed Stephen Toomey in Ambassador Hotel in a drunken rage. He couldn't remember anything, but his forearms were bruised, and nevertheless he carried the suitcase down and even had some help from people. But I was thinking, if your arms are bruised, you definitely have some marks on your whole body. Then someone will be suspected from what are you up to?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Eh,
I found his murder to be strange, and the Dahmer's account of it to be.
It sounds
questionable.
more to me that he was also with someone else possibly in that room. There were 3 or 4 people there.
Yes, and there's a known fact that Dahmer had met Toomey in the bar area of the Ambassador Hotel. And I believe that's where it was, the bar, and they ended up, because I've heard different accounts of it, that they met somewhere else, and they went to the Ambassador, and then I've heard that they met in a bar, so I really don't know which one is exactly the truth, but I do know that the Ambassador Hotel was a very strange case.
Yeah.
By the way, that killing was quite strange, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it sounded like there was more than one person involved in that.
Let's go to the at least indirect connection with the Milwaukee Age Project, because the owner of Lacage was supporting the Milwaukee Age Project.
Yes, owner of Lacage. He was he ran a fundraiser in the 80s along with several other gay bars in the area, and one of the charities that he supported was the Milwaukee Age Project, and Michael Lazowski knew several of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims, including Curtis Straughter, who made a phone call from Jeffrey Dahmer's house to Michael Lazowski the night he was murdered.
Yeah, we found that in the FBI files.
Yes, and I find it to be very, very interesting that Michael Lazowski has all these indirect connections to victims, to the gay clubs that Dahmer frequented.
Yep.
It's a name that constantly pops up in the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And he also hosted a public access TV show catered toward the gay community right after the Dahmer was arrested. He started hosting a show with another activist, and that activist's name was Danny Fonz, and Danny Fonz was connected to outing gay politicians on the same show. He also had connections to the Boy Scouts, and he had connections to other strange political
Parties.
situations.
Yeah. But also, Dahmer's mother, Joyce Slint, worked as a case manager for the Central Valley AIDS team in 1991. So they also have that connection.
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. And I find that interesting that people connected to the Jeffrey Dahmer case were working with gay charities. It's just or organizations. It's interesting, to say the least.
Also, if I may add, Dahmer made also a lot of terrorizing phone calls to his victims' relatives, and also to gay gay hotlines to talk about problems and make complaints and things like that. And he was like terrorizing those people.
Yes, he called a gay hotline and
Yeah, he said
bragged that
Yeah,
he killed gay people and he felt good about it. And then you had he also made a call to a coroner and said that he was experiencing something weird with a body, and he wanted to know if it was normal.
yeah,
And people suspected that was Jeffrey Dahmer calling that coroner. And he also had been working with the nursing home under an assumed name.
yeah.
So to me, there's a lot of things that suggest that he was possibly could have been lurking around these charities, and he had access to these people's information.
Yeah, I think it's also like always funny that they classify Dahmer as a loner, but if you really do the investigations where this guy was hanging out, all these clubs, sometimes exclusive clubs, you can only scratch your head from what the hell's going on.
Yeah, I don't believe that he was a relative unknown in the gay community like it's portrayed.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he was moving in and out through these communities without under some guise. I at the very least, I believe these establishments knew Jeffrey Dahmer, if not the customers.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's move to a few of his victims because it's interesting to characterize what exactly kind of people they were and that they have some kind of hidden connections and oddities. You have James Dockstader. He was only 14 years old, so that's
Yes, he was
and he's a street hustler.
A street hustler, and he was picked up by Jeffrey Dahmer. I believe it was in front of C'est La Vie. It could have been 219, but I'm pretty sure it was C'est La Vie.
Yeah,
and both Sansaphone brothers were picked up outside of C'est La Vie.
Both of the Sinterson brothers? No, I think one of them was picked up in a shopping mall, I believe, or on the street.
Well, one of them, actually, let me correct that. One of them was picked up.
Yeah, it is interesting because now we have made those connections with gay clubs, establishments that are possibly corrupted, and we have all these victims and also young victims who are hanging before those places. Just maybe
yes, and it sounds like many of the underage victims were street hustlers.
Yeah.
And it's possible that they were living above C'est La Vie and possibly Club 219. Club 219 also had apartments above that establishment.
Yeah, and I reported before that two brothers, Conorak and Soundtom Synthesophone, were also connected with their World Vision, and that is also like a child trafficking front. So you have those connections also.
Yes, you have that child trafficking front, and I suspect C'est La Vie and Club 219 were involved in similar activities based on the apartments that they had above their businesses.
I also want to say one of the victims, Errol Lindsay, he was only 19 years old, and if people have seen the trial footage, she's the woman who was had a complete outburst against Jeffrey Dahmer, and she was escorted out of the courtroom. She yelled something in the form from Jeffrey, I hate you, you fucking bastard, and then she screams like really loud. Definitely something is wrong. And to me, that's always like the hunch that it was almost like personal, like she was to try to state something that she isn't like fully convinced that Jeffrey Dahmer was alone responsible for it or the motive that he provided.
Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't fuck with me, Jeffrey. I kill you. God damn it. Look at me, motherfucker. I can kill you.
What's your name,
I can kill you.
And she also contested that Errol Lindsey was not gay. So that's also interesting. Why the hell was he going with Dahmer to his apartment or ended up at Dahmer's apartment?
Yeah, I believe that there was more involved in the Errol Lindsey's. I believe all the murders there was more involved than just him luring them from these member-only bars
No.
and other gay establishments like the bookstores, and I believe there's more to that.
Let's talk about Oliver Lacey. You also know a few things about him.
I think, to be honest with you, Oliver Lacey is the most puzzling out of all the murders, because when they found Oliver Lacey, in his wallet there was a card to Man's Country. And Man's Country was a gay bathhouse where you would have, they would show pornography. Men would get together to have sexual trysts. It was basically a free-for-all in Man's Country.
Mm-hmm.
And all the evidence that the family provides suggests that Oliver Lacey was not gay.
Yeah, he had a fiance, he had a two-year-old child.
And a 2-year-old child, and he had many girlfriends, but he had a business card to a gay bathhouse.
Yeah, it's very conflicted, yeah. But
it's very conflicting information.
He was also like an Olympic level track athlete.
Yes, he was a well-known track athlete. He was very good. He was a very good runner. And to me, something does not match up. The family's information does not match up with what was found in his wallet.
No, I can also...
That's not to say that he is gay. He could have... It's speculation, but he could have been working at Man's Country.
Yeah, or possibly, like you said earlier, an informant, or, I don't know, yeah, undercover.
Or he could have been an informant. He could have been somebody that Jeffrey Dahmer knew, and
I also found it fascinating. I included the segment in. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. No, I included the segment of Catherine Lacey, Oliver's mother, and she bluntly stated that she didn't believe Jeffrey Dahmer was solely responsible of his death. She was definitely saying that there were more people involved.
I had to see for myself. He told me how the body was, which I told him, tell me everything. I want to know everything. He told me how the body was, apart and everything. And I even asked to see that too, but he said that he couldn't show me that. The only thing that he could show me that I could really see real good is the head. I went down to the thing to revive the body, and I looked at that. I still don't understand how they could have, I still said someone else. It's not just one person. Not with my son, I know.
Yes, I recall that, and she's definitely correct. And which leads me to believe that the family may have provided information that suggested that there was more people involved.
Let's go to Eddie Smith, 27 years old, a known acquaintance of Jeffrey Dahmer, Actually, when he disappeared, he was with Jeffrey Dahmer. Some of his friends noticed that he was with Jeffrey Dahmer, but nevertheless go to the cops or question Dahmer. Where the hell is Eddie Smith? His body was placed in acid, and his bones were used as ornaments. So that's definitely some kind of a ritualistic behavior to me.
Yes, he was murdered. They never found his body.
And to make everything like worse and more troubling, his brother was found murdered in 1999. He was 39 years old. He was stabbed to death in a ritual homicide on the 21st of March, 1999.
Yes, he was found with cigarette ash in his ear, pornographic magazine stuffed in his pockets. It was that was definitely a ritualized murder. Eddie Smith, what was interesting about Eddie Smith was Goldie Adams, who was a cross-dresser who worked at, I believe it was Phoenix, the Phoenix Club.
Mm-hmm.
She stated,
I want to add very fast. Ernest Smith also had a military career as a Navy, and he served in the Persian Gulf War. So that's maybe also interesting or important.
She mentioned that Jeffrey Dahmer said that he had called up Racine PD and they told him that Eddie Smith was cut up in 3 pieces.
Yeah, that's right.
And not once was Jeffrey Dahmer questioned about that murder. And it's interesting because Racine, during that time, was known for satanic activity.
I can also recall reading an inquiry in the FBI files from a person that saw Jeffrey Dahmer's name carved in a picnic bench in Racine.
Yes, he was also seen in the Regency Mall in Racine as well.
Yeah, always.
And he denied all of this
to course.
The FBI. I personally think that Jeffrey Dahmer told a lot of lies to the FBI. So.
Yeah. Don't mention about Florida. Don't mention about Florida.
Yeah, no mention about that either. Or Baumholder or any of the other.
I know, yeah. Okay, let's go to the most fascinating connection that you actually found, and it's about Joe Dressler. Can you please enlighten us about that? Because that's totally fascinating and maybe a red flag for this whole case.
Joe Dressler was alleged to have murdered James Madden. Madden was with an environmental group, and he went to Joe Dressler's house to solicit donations. And Joe Dressler ended up torturing and shooting James Madden in the head, killing him, and then chopping up his body and dumping the body in remote places in Racine. To me, right there, that's a red flag because there was, this is 30 minutes from, 30 miles, or 25, 30 miles from Milwaukee. And we know, and everybody knows what Jeffrey Dahmer did or was alleged to have done.
Mm-hmm.
And both men displayed similar behavior. Both men were fascinated with faces of death. Both men had similar taste. I mean, Joe Dressler was found to have tapes of snuff films and pornography and tapes of autopsies.
Yeah.
He also pictures.
It was also interesting that they actually found pamphlets in his suitcase. I mean, pamphlets that is like advertising, and like he was in touch with like an organization or someone with the same desires and habits.
Yes, and I just find that Joe Dressler and Jeffrey Dahmer being so similar in what they've been did in the alleged murders, and their their style and what they did. I find it too coincidental.
Yeah, let me read from. Let me read a small piece from a newspaper. Although the injuries may be consistent with a satanic type of death, it is my opinion that it's a homosexual homicide. And that's what Jeffrey Jensen said, the Milwaukee County medical examiner. And he also handled the Jeffrey Dahmer case.
Yeah, I find that interesting that he's associating satanic behavior with homosexuality.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that is such a whitewash of the truth. They're essentially whitewashing Satanism with homosexual behavior. And that's, well, I mean, I think that these satanic cults participate in homosexual behavior? Yes. But to whitewash it and to play it off as just homosexuals who do this is so far off base.
Tell us about attorney who was cross-examining, and he told about stories about hooded people in the woods.
Yeah, when they were cross-examining, they said that they were aware of satanic behavior, particularly in rural areas, like Racine. They also mentioned that there was a group of a cult that met and was playing volleyball. They would get together and play volleyball. They were a cult, and they would get together near the river over in Racine. There was a river over there, and they would get together and play volleyball.
Yeah, and even Jeffrey Jensen admitted that there was an indication that there was a general amount of satanic actions in rural areas in Racine. So it was there. Yeah.
Yes, he did testify that satanic behavior was being conducted in that area.
And also, incredibly, Joe Dressler actually worked at the elevator at the apartment Dahmer was in, right? At least twice.
Change subject slightly here. I'm interested in whether you think there's any connection between Joe Dressler, the accused killer of Madden, and Dahmer. Can you verify, or has your department verified that Dressler did work on the elevator in Dahmer's apartment 2 different times while Dahmer was living there? Secondly, do you think there was contact between the men? Thirdly, do you think there's any connection?
We have had no confirmation nor any indication that there's been a connection.
That was reported in the media, and they had an inquiry into it, which was secret. No one knows what was revealed in those inquiries, and it was concluded that Joe Dressler, according to them, Joe Dressler and Jeffrey Dahmer were not connected.
But initially, I can remember reading the news articles. Initially, Milwaukee Police Department claimed that they were like interested, or more like focusing the case that Jeffrey Dahmer may have an accomplice. There were indications that
Yes.
yeah.
And early on in the case, it definitely seemed like they were looking for possible accomplices.
Yeah.
And once that inquiry basically stated that there was no connection to Dressler. It seemed like the accomplice angle was dropped, almost as if to say, "We're not going there. We're not touching that."
Actually, the same thing with
We're gonna just
also with also with Larry Eiler. Actually,
what they were saying was they basically were saying is we're gonna just focus on Jeffrey as a lone assailant, and we're not going to touch any sort of accomplices, and we're not going to really touch the satanic angle. It just smelled of a cover-up. I think they knew what they were dealing with, and they just chose not to focus the case on that.
yeah, wasn't there also a statement made by a guy who was going to the gay clubs, and he said, "I remember seeing Larry Eiler in little gyms, and I'm sure Dahmer was there at one point or another."
Yes, I had found some information on a forum that's connected to Chicago, and they were discussing a possible serial killer in Boys Town, and one of the posts stated that him and his friends went to one of the bars, and they were very sure that they saw Dahmer and Eiler at the same bar.
Yeah. And Dahmer owned the book Free to Kill about Larry
Yes,
Eiler.
he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Also, I can remember reading.
Didn't he also own Killing for Company as well?
Yeah, about Dennis Nielsen. Yeah. I can also remember reading in the FBI files that there was information obtained by an unidentified caller, and he said that he met Dahmer at Carol's Speakeasy Tavern in Chicago, and he was offering him $300 to go to his apartment and taking photos. And he also added that Dahmer was with his friend, whom he described as a white male in his early 30s or 40s.
Yes, I remember reading that, and the person that I thought of when reading that was Joe Dressler.
Yeah, likewise.
I couldn't think it couldn't have been Larry Eiler. Larry Eiler was already dead at that point or incarcerated, and the only person that I could figure that Jeffrey Dahmer was hanging with that description was Joe Dressler.
Yeah, I can also remember reading a newspaper clipping entitled "Dahmer Spoke of Wild Weekends," and a former co-worker of the chocolate factory was speaking about him, that he was like a party person, that he sometimes was completely broke after a weekend out. He didn't have any cigarettes, but he was like really engaging in social activities.
Yes, and that's the media says that he was a loner, and he had trouble, with sexual relationships and even just general relationships. But I find that completely hard to believe, considering that he used to have wild times in Chicago.
Yeah.
I find that very hard to believe. I have it very hard to believe that he would be a member of several, member-only clubs. The bar, the clubs and the bathhouses. I just find that very hard to believe that he was not social.
No, I think that's a complete BS. I know for sure, actually.
Yeah, I think he was a very social person. I think he knew how to convince people. He was very persuasive.
Yeah.
I think he was a very good manipulator.
Let's talk about Dahmer's neighbor. He was killed in May of 1991, so a few months after Dahmer's arrest. What do you think about that?
There was, I believe that could have.
Milwaukee police declined to make statements about that if Jeffrey Dahmer was considered as a suspect. So, and that guy was strangled to death. So that's also interesting.
It could have been connected. It's probably likely connected to that.
Yeah.
Maybe he knew something.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
That was what I wanted to point out. Yeah, maybe he was like a liability, but that's speculation, of course. But still, it is highly suspected that a neighbor was killed in the same ritualistic fashion that he was also doing.
Yeah, and also if you read some of the stuff, also too, it was Dahmer had access to other apartments.
I also always had a feeling that a lot of those people who were living in that apartment building, I won't say necessarily that they all knew Dom was up to completely, but I think there was like a lot of drugs going in and out of there. There's like a really drug
Yeah,
induced.
I think that apartment complex was a place where drug trafficking and human trafficking took place.
Yeah, so something around those lines, and also pornography, of course.
Yeah, I believe that too. That apartment was in a really rundown section of Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And those areas are, like, those really rundown areas are a cover for those type of activities.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that is
A
my
lot of
feeling.
those communities that are run down like that are used for, human trafficking, drug trafficking, satanic activity. It's a cover. It's a cover to make it look like they're, just
I think
poor
it's
people.
I think it's also like incredible that he was getting away for so long with that terrible odor in that whole apartment, and they all knew it came from Dahmer. Why the hell was it going on for such a long period of time? Even when police officers came into the building and returned a victim of them, which he killed moments later.
Which I find interesting because I think that was like I said, it was a drug, human trafficking.
Yep.
The police may have been complicit in the sense of they're probably told to lay off until you had cops that were likely not in on what was going on and they did their job. That's what I find interesting.
Okay, I want to.
There are cases.
Yep.
There are cases where you see, like, serial killers arrested, even though it's clear there's police complicity. There's eventually a situation where a particular group of cops are not in on it, and they do their job.
Yep.
And I find that, usually that you could look at different cases where that exists, and one of them that stands out to me is the Paul Bernardo case.
Yeah, maybe in the future we can discuss that in depth. Yeah.